When didn't that happen? And why did what happened become that didn't happen? Well, one time that didn't happen because we all died, and that sucks. But sometimes that didn't happen because someone did something stupid, because they forgot how their stuff works, and so we all agree that definitely didn't happen. Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. I don't know what comic books are like now, but it used to be a rite of passage for a young comic reader to grow old with the hobby and eventually see some hero they loved who sacrificed their life for the greater good come back as a clone or a temporal duplicate from the future or a salvaged body plucked from a dimensional catastrophe by a bunch of alien squid people living in the methane seas under the frozen crust of Ganymede, and they make you a cyborg and then they have to put you in suspended animation because, oh, you're also 10,000 years in the past? But actually, that didn't happen either. What even is happening? Retconning is another tool in our toolbox, and it's a pretty powerful one. It can solve almost any problem, but it's also very dangerous. It attacks suspension of disbelief, which is maybe the most valuable thing we have. The word retcon is a portmanteau of retroactive continuity. In other words, changing what has officially happened. And there are lots of ways to do this, some big and dangerous, some small and basically meaningless. For instance, this is pretty common. A player has a very clear idea who their character is, and they pick a class they think approximates this. But after they've played for a while, they realize this is the wrong class for this character. So with the DM's permission, and I think ideally at the DM's suggestion, they change classes. There's no notion that the actual character has changed. They didn't give up adventuring and go back to college and get a new degree in a different field. The player just chooses to express their character differently. In the MCDM community, this is called Boots Was Always a Bard. Remember, your character is a real person who lives in this imaginary world. Your character sheet is an imperfect translation of this real person into the language of 5th edition. Why not switch it out if your original choices don't fit your idea? So that's one kind of retcon. Pretty harmless, easy to do. I've never known any DM to strictly enforce the choices the player made during character creation. I'm not even sure what the point of doing that would be. But there's this idea out there that you're bending or breaking the rules by letting a player switch classes. But is there a rule that explicitly says you are stuck with the decisions you made at first level and they cannot be undone? That would surprise me. It doesn't have to be as radical as changing your entire class. Players are expected to make lots of choices during character creation and when they level up. And for new players, there's no way for them to know how these choices will play out. Very common for a player to realize, I picked the wrong option when I leveled up. To illustrate this, I present a modest play we will now enact for you with your permission. Maybe mama moo. Okay, Lars, it's your turn.
I cast jump.
Okay, what does that do?
It lets me jump 3 times my movement.
Does it?
That's what it says.
Read it to me.
You touch a creature, that creature's jump distance is tripled until the spell ends.
Right. That doesn't give you more movement. If your movement is 30 feet, it's still 30 feet. You can just use more of that movement to jump.
That's stupid. What happens if my jump distance ends up being more than my movement?
You'll start jumping this round, and then you'll land next round.
That's ridiculous.
I don't disagree, but that is how it works.
Well, I'd never taken that spell if I knew that's what it did.
I think you probably wouldn't have. You want to just swap out a spell right now?
Can I do that?
I mean, it's not legal, no, but I will let you go back in time and undo that. Yeah, sure. This happens all the time. If I knew how this worked, I wouldn't have chosen this. And all RPGs require some degree of DM interpretation. These games all have rules. All rules use the human language, and the human language is an imperfect tool. Sometimes it's not if I knew how this worked, it's if I knew this is how you were going to interpret this, right? It's our job as dungeon masters to interpret the rules, and it is inevitable that a player is going to read the same text you read and come to a different conclusion than you, and then make choices based on that wrong conclusion. When this happens, sometimes I change my interpretation to fit the players. Why not? But sometimes I stick to my guns because it's important to me for some reason, and in those moments, I go out of my way to make sure the player doesn't suffer because we disagreed on how a spell or a feat or whatever should work. When I was younger, if I disagreed with a player's interpretation, there's a good chance we would spend hours arguing about it and it would become a whole thing. My attitude was, there is a correct answer to this, and it just so happens to be my answer. And being right, which I think is just another way of keeping score, winning, was of primary importance to me. But now when I see that the player is upset because I don't think their cool thing does what they thought it did, I feel bad. So I try to work out a compromise, and retconning, just letting the player pick a different option without consequence, is a great way to make sure the player gets to do cool stuff without breaking my interpretation of the rules. Another very common and pretty harmless retcon is to let a player undo a choice they made during their turn. In my group, the code for this is friendly game. The player realizes, shit, I forgot I had this potion. I would have used it. Or, shit, I prepared a spell specifically for this and I forgot. I would have cast it last round. Friendly game. And this comes down to sportsmanship. I think almost everything I learned about sportsmanship, I learned from my friend Dave Miles. Dave wants to win, but he doesn't want to win just because you didn't understand the rules or you forgot something or you didn't notice something obvious. He wants to win after you played your best. So he would actively encourage you to play better. He would remind you of stuff you forgot or point out stuff you didn't notice. That is good sportsmanship. However, there is a limit to this. New players, absolutely give them every opportunity to go back and fix their mistakes. But if you're an experienced player, well, living with your mistakes is part of being an adult and part of being a good player. In fact, Dave was the one who taught me that sometimes when the other player offers a redo, a mulligan, you say, no thanks, I made this mistake, I'm going to live with it. It's the only way I will ever get better. Friendly game is a question you ask of the other players, and the tradition is, if you screwed up, as long as no one else has taken their turn yet, the next player is still thinking about what they want to do. When you ask for friendly game, the expectation is that the answer should be yes, because your screw up hasn't affected anything yet. You still ask because you're being polite. But once another player has acted, and especially if your retcon would affect what they did, then you absolutely need to ask for friendly game, and you do not expect the answer to be yes. It's up to the other players at the table. You are aware in that circumstance that someone might say, no, you should have remembered. And that saying no in that instance is not being an asshole. And when it's a boss battle, like the climactic battle of the entire adventure, well, your DM is probably running with all hamsters at full tilt and you can see the smoke coming out of their ears. And in that scenario, you should expect to live with your mistakes. Sometimes that's being an adult. And that's true of you and your character. Characters forget things too. But outside those rare and intense moments where everything is on the line, I, as a DM, tend to err on the side of the players. Another way of looking at it is I try not to punish your character for a mistake you made, especially if I don't think your character would make that mistake. Remember, the players only play their characters for about 4 hours a week, but their characters are playing themselves 24 hours a day. They know what they can do and how the world around them works, way better than the players ever will. So I tend to take it easy and let folks redo stuff if I think, yeah, you forgot there was a rope here you had to pull, but your character would not have forgotten. They can see the rope, it's right in front of them. Go ahead and redo your turn. Sometimes if we've moved a little further down the initiative track and the players realize they screwed up, meaning they forgot something important or made a decision based on a wrong interpretation of the scenario, like maybe I said the chasm is 60 feet long and 15 feet across and they got those numbers mixed up or whatever. Maybe we've even gone a few rounds past that. I will stop and say, okay, Tom, or whoever's turn it is, you had a vision of what would happen if things were different. But that was just a premonition, a flash of insight. Anyway, that didn't happen, and rewind back to the point of contention. So in general, going back in time and undoing something like a choice a player made when they made their character or leveled up, or letting a character go back around and undo something they did in combat is fine, as long as it doesn't disrupt the other players too much. There's this whole other type of retcon where the DM just decides to change the details of their world. This happens so much the players might not even notice it, especially if they're not taking very careful notes. But I change the details of my world all the time. It's always in flux. I change stuff because I changed my mind, or I thought about something some more and I came to a different conclusion, or I got bored with something and I wanted to change it up. My tastes change. The rules change every 8 years for some unfathomable reason. Also, my players change. New players means new characters, and it's my job to make sure that if the player has a cool, strong fantasy for their character, that fantasy exists in my world somewhere, and that often means retconning stuff. No big deal. So those are the everyday retcons that happen at the table all the time, and this is normal and good. But there are other retcons that are more challenging, because sometimes bad things happen at the table, and you, the DM, feel bad. Typically, this happens when a PC dies, but it doesn't have to be a PC. It could have been an NPC everybody loved, and they're dead, and now no one feels like playing anymore. The players are miserable. You are miserable, and you feel this overwhelming urge to stop and retcon what just happened. None of this is real anyway. Why not just agree that didn't happen? Because the shared belief in the reality of this imaginary world is the only thing that holds the work together. If you destroy that belief, You destroy the imagination's ability to create within that world. And pulling the curtain back and saying, let's just pretend that never happened, is just another way of saying none of this is real. What's the point in pretending like it is? I have definitely been in games where a character died and no one was upset, because sometimes character death feels right. But that is rare. At the end of the day, we are not sitting around the fire telling a story together. We are playing a game with dice, and sometimes things do not play out in a satisfying way. And that is the story. This just happened in Dusk. The players had made it through 10 sessions of gameplay without ever facing a real challenge, and now I felt like it was time to ratchet things up. I introduced the Blood Skull Hobgoblins. The players were suitably impressed, and now it was time to fight them. I made the fight too hard. Happens all the time. The players cakewalk through a few sessions. You think, okay, time to challenge them, and you overcompensate. I had to tweak all the enemies in the middle of the battle to reduce their hit points and damage. Happens all the time. Encounter design does not stop just because you rolled initiative. Like almost all my encounters, this was an untested prototype, but the cost of that was one of the characters died. It was very dramatic, but it happened at a place and a time in the game where it felt like, what is the point of continuing after this? Also, I really did not expect the battle to be that lethal. I didn't think death was on the table. So even if I felt like, well, I said these hobgoblins were nasty, and they were, I still felt really, really bad. Like, why even bother DMing if this is the outcome? I broke their hearts, in other words, and mine. Maybe mine more than theirs. But I never considered retconning it. Some deeper instinct in me, and instinct is the wrong word for this. Instinct is exactly the wrong word for it because you are born with instincts. That's what instinct means. And this is a sense I have developed manually with my hands over decades of being a DM. Something inside me said, don't do anything. Don't stop the campaign. Don't go back in time and redo the fight. Just let it happen. Be vaguely encouraging about the future and just wait. I had faith that a solution would present itself, and it did. I had an encounter on deck that was designed to let a player sort of wish for anything they want. And I realized, aha! This is the solution. No retcon necessary. I do think it is possible to save a situation like this with a retcon though, but you need to be very careful. Do not just wave your hand and say, never mind, that sucked, everything is back to the way it was, and try to rewind the clock to the beginning of the encounter or the beginning of the turn. That will ruin your game. What you can do is say, oh, I screwed up. I did some math wrong, or I added too many dice in Fantasy Grounds, or whatever. You're not dead. You're just unconscious and dying. It helps that I actually do screw that stuff up sometimes. If you replace a catastrophe with a miracle, you're just telling everyone this world isn't real and there's no reason to take it seriously. But if you replace a catastrophe with a very serious problem, then you give the players a new problem to solve, and that helps maintain this sense of continuity. Oh, he's not dead, but he's unconscious and dying, and if we don't do something, we are all screwed. That keeps the drama moving forward, and having a new, very serious problem to solve helps trick the players into ignoring your retcon. They might not even see it as a retcon, they'll just see it as you going back and fixing a mistake. Friendly game? Of course, all you did was kick the can down the road. What if they die again? Well, that will suck. But, and this may sound weird, but it will suck less. Because now the players all know death is on the line, and you gave them a chance to unfuck the situation. They had more agency the second time, and they aren't surprised the second time. I think the worst PC deaths happen when no one really thought death was on the line. So that's my real advice. Don't frame it as rewinding the clock. Frame it as fixing a mistake, and leave the PCs in dire straits, so they still have a problem to focus on. But you know your game and your group and the specific scenario, and I do not. Maybe a PC just died, more PCs are likely to, and you don't think it's reasonable to say, oh, sorry, I just did too much damage, and let them only be mostly dead. What do? Well, the first thing is staunch the bleeding. If one or two PCs are dead, use this as an opportunity to have the villains start bargaining with the heroes. Drop your weapons and we'll let you leave with your dead friends. Right? The bad guys don't want to lose any more people either, and winning a negotiation like that makes the enemy leader look good to their minions. And this at least gives the heroes an opportunity to avoid a TPK. But then they have the problem of, how do we resurrect our dead friend? Well, This is the question. Is there anyone in the world with raised dead who cares enough about these heroes to bring them back from the dead? Well, remember that the heroes might not be that important, but what they're trying to do probably was. So a local cleric might not literally care about these heroes, but they probably care about what the party was trying to do, and that is good reason to help them out. Typically, if you're 4th level or lower, you don't know anyone powerful enough to raise you, and you weren't working on anything important enough for a high-level cleric to worry about. The good news is, folks tend not to get as worked up when their 1st or even 3rd level character dies. They hadn't been playing them that long. Even a very low-level character, probably there's someone around here, the Baron with her court priest, or a witch who lives out in the woods, who can help. You know, maybe they can't cast Raise Dead at will, they're not that high level, but they probably have some scrolls hidden away for an emergency. Traditionally, using an NPC to bring a PC back from the dead puts the PC in the NPC's debt, which in my experience, both as a player and as a dungeon master, is a great source of future adventure. However, sometimes things happen so fast, you didn't have time to ask for a friendly game or let the enemies offer the heroes a way out for a price. Without really understanding how, everything went so wrong so fast, you suddenly have an entire dead party. Now what? It might seem like everyone wants to go back and pick up as though they hadn't all died, but I don't think that will work because I don't think the players want to go back and pretend like it didn't happen. They want it not to have happened. That is not the same thing. My advice is do not reset the clock, just think outside the box. It's D&D, right? It's a fantasy world. There are fantasy solutions. We covered some of this in the Let's Kill a PC video. The party is dead. Now what? Well, someone needs to save them. It may be as simple as you regain consciousness, but something is different. Something has changed. Yeah, because you've been resurrected by a necromancer who wants you to do her bidding. And now you're the same character you were a minute ago, the same abilities, but undead. And you need to figure out how to get out from under this necromancer's thumb. You got to make sure in a scenario like that the players don't feel too discouraged. They need to know it is possible to rejoin the land of the living. And also, you need to make being undead cool. Shouldn't be hard. I believe in you. It is a fantasy game. Think outside the box. Maybe it's time to develop your afterlife. What if the heroes wake up in limbo and they have to find a way out? Very ancient Greek underworld shit. I think that would be really cool for the players. In a previous video, I suggested you could roll up new characters who are on a mission to retrieve the dead heroes' corpses so they can be resurrected. This sounds awesome. But what if the players like the new heroes better? Is that a problem? I think the break in continuity could be an issue. Players are sad because their old character is dead. If your plan is give them new heroes to get excited by, why bother resurrecting the old characters? So yeah, that could be a problem. What if you just skip the details? Tell the players they leveled up, but ask each player to give something up. A magic item is best, but this is 5th edition, so it might have to be something else, something physical, an eye, a class ability, and then tell them to level up and have them describe to you how they were rescued from the abyss. In other words, don't retcon it, just use a cutscene. Skip the part where someone resurrects them and just assume it happens. At the end of the day, it is a fantasy world. Don't think of death as failure. Think of it as just another fail state. Just another problem to overcome. There aren't incredibly robust tools for this in the core rules. We have no official adventures about being dead or waking up in limbo. You're gonna have to make something up, reskin an existing adventure. The shorter this is, the better. If getting out of limbo or being undead or being new heroes sent in to save the old ones is like one session, maybe 3 encounters, then the players can get back to their original characters faster and it will seem more like an interlude, part of the original hero's story, and less like you're starting up a whole new story with potentially different characters. That's it, folks. That's the retconning video. I hope something in here was useful. Super interested in seeing your comments. I realize experienced DMs have already thought about all this, but this series is for new dungeon masters. Remember, if you want to get an alert when a new video drops, you got to click the bell down there. Not the most obvious UI in the world. Arcadia 12 just came out with 3 very cool new articles, including rules for uncursing a harpy or a Medusa and returning them to their original form. New Fey monsters from the Shadowfell, so these are darker, more sinister Fey creatures. And 2 new encounters for players to experience, well, player characters, for PCs to experience in their dreams. and also a special bonus 4th article written by Rob Kuntz, who is one of the OG D&D guys from the early TSR days. This is not a 5th edition adventure. It is a small dungeon for the 1970s edition of the game, and it's even got like a 1970s layout and art. It's like the rogue level in NetHack. You enter what seems to be an older, more primitive world. It comes with some advice for how to run the adventure in 5th edition, but I think it's just fun to read this thing. Also, we do have a monster book Kickstarter we are working hard on. Lots of cool stuff to show you, but we gotta wait until next month to see it. If you want an alert when the Kickstarter goes live, click the link in the doobly-doo below to sign up, and we will email you when the Kickstarter launches. Thanks for watching, everybody. Next video, I think we start the Appendix M series. That seems likely. Until then, peace out.